what I really want to talk about is something that I've never heard anybody else really talk about in terms of a full-blown sermon. And I like kind of coming from a different angle on stuff and picking out things that maybe are unnoticed or overlooked. And so I decided I would write a sermon about what Jesus looked like. Reflections on the incarnation and Jesus' physical appearance. Incarnation, if you don't know, just means it's just a word that refers to Jesus going from godhood to becoming one of us. God incarnate, you've heard that phrase. That's just a reference to God becoming this man that we would know as Jesus. You know, because this time of year we talk about this being Christmas time, and we reflect, as others have already said this morning, about God becoming man, about Jesus becoming human, Jesus born in a barn, becoming a human baby. All of the immensity and enormity of God reduced to a little baby in a barn, laid in a manger, surrounded by animals and parents who were very young and very poor. One of the things that's interesting, though, about this whole story is that the Bible tells us almost nothing about what Jesus looked like. So you might wonder, was Jesus a cute baby? Well, the Bible doesn't say. Well, I don't know. A lot of people say there aren't any ugly babies. I don't know about that. Now, you know, I don't want to get into debate about that. I've seen a few that I think were a little questionable. You know, I mean, Dr. Jones, am I right? I mean, the face only a mother could love kind of thing. I mean, I don't know. So I don't know if Jesus was a cute baby or not. The other thing I don't know is what did he look like when he grew up? Well, the thing is, we don't really know. Well, we know very, very little. There are a couple of small details that I'll talk about in a minute, but that's about it. And that is, seems to me kind of weird, kind of unusual, because, if you were, say, to write a biography of a famous person, or just any person, one of the things you would certainly include would be a description of their physical appearance. You know, what do they look like? How big are they? How tall are they? You know, what's their hair color, their eye color, how big is their nose and their ears, and, do they have any strange features that make them stand out, that kind of thing. What do they look like? If you were to describe a friend, to someone else who doesn't know them, one of the things that you might include would be a description of their physical appearance, right? Or even in a nonfiction book, if you're writing a novel, it's something just made up. The main character especially, you're going to take some time in the novel to describe that person's physical appearance. What do they look like? So it's odd, to us anyway, that the four Gospels that tell the story of Jesus don't mention his physical appearance really at all. That's sort of strange from our perspective. So why is it that the Gospels that tell the story of Jesus' birth and Jesus all the way from his birth all the way through to his crucifixion, resurrection, and ascension, why don't these four stories of Jesus, tell us what he looked like? Well, there are probably many reasons why. One of the reasons might be that we have, as humans, a tendency to turn things into idols. So if we knew exactly what Jesus looked like, we probably couldn't help ourselves from making an image of some kind and essentially turning it into an idol that we worship almost in place of the real Jesus. So that's maybe one reason why Jesus isn't described physically. Another reason might be that if you happen to look like Jesus, in other words, let's say that Matthew, that we read from earlier, if Matthew actually described in vivid detail what Jesus looked like, if you looked like that, you might tend to think, what? Like, I'm more like Jesus than you are because I look like him more than you do. We would begin to think of those physical characteristics that Jesus had as maybe being better than ones that are not like Jesus had. And then the last one may simply be, why did the four Gospels not tell us what Jesus looked like? Well, it may just be that it isn't important. Because the Bible's really clear that the Bible tells us, and I think we even believe this by faith, that the Bible reveals to us what it needs to reveal to us. It tells us what we need to know, right? So if the Bible doesn't tell us about Jesus' physical appearance, then I would assume that isn't an important detail. That's interesting, though, in a culture like ours, in which physical appearance, beauty, attractiveness is so revered that in some of us it becomes the central thing, the most important thing about us. We live in a culture that now, over the last 10, 15 years, has become obsessed with what we call social media, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, all those others that I don't know anything about. I really don't know anything about TikTok, just heard of it. Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter is what I'm on. Don't know much about the rest of them. But the point is, there are people in our culture who are literally famous for one reason and one reason alone. Because of how they look. Because they're beautiful. Because they're handsome. Because they are physically attractive. That's the only thing we know about them. Yes, right there. That's the culture we live in. That's the only thing we know about them. They're famous because they are attractive. It's interesting. Now, in my case, the only time of year that I'm considered attractive is this time of year when people are looking for Santa Claus. I used to care a lot, though, about, the physical attractiveness. A lot of you may be old enough to remember the old TV show Growing Pains. You may remember that show. And there was a character on there named Mike Seaver. I should have put his picture up there. I found out many years after we were married that my wife had a big old poster of Mike Seaver on her bedroom wall when she was growing up. Now, we happened to meet him one year, 3 or 4 years ago. I was speaking at the Pepperdine Bible Lectures, and we ended up meeting Mike Seaver. His real name's Kirk Cameron. And so, of course, my wife had to get her picture made with Kirk Cameron. I didn't find out until after I took the picture that she had this big poster on her wall growing up, or I might have refused. Bailey, when I was in high school, I bought a leather jacket like Mike Seaver. And, I pulled it off pretty good. I don't care to tell you, I wasn't like Mike Seaver level, but at some point what we realize, as obsessed as we all may be in junior high and high school and college and young adulthood, we get old enough, we realize that the physical attractiveness, even for the most attractive of us, begins to fade, doesn't it? If you get online and look at some of our old crushes from the 80s or 70s or even 90s, and you think, what do they look like today? Could be a little disappointing, couldn't it? Because it happens to all of us. Age and time, it begins to wither away, take away our physical attractiveness, and that's true for everybody. So the question then is, what did Jesus look like? Well, again, as I said, the Bible doesn't say much about it, and there are no genuine drawings or pictures or sculptures of Jesus. We do have some drawings and attempts. Now, this is an ancient Roman depiction of Jesus. That's Jesus in the middle, and you notice, well, it's hard to tell, but he, in this picture, doesn't have a beard. And that may be because Roman men typically didn't wear beards. And so this is a Roman depiction of Jesus, and he doesn't have, it looks like he has a beard, but he actually doesn't. That's just the way it looks. Let's go to the next one. This is another depiction of Jesus from the Middle Ages. You notice the beard, the long hair, and he has the halo, which is in the Middle Ages, art would depict someone who was some sort of deity with this halo around their head like that. Let's go to the next one. And there's another one of Jesus. You see the halos around them depicting some sort of sainthood or deification. Let's go to the next one. Now this is more the modern version of Jesus. This is when we think of what did Jesus look like, most people, at least modern Americans, will tend to think of this type of picture. He's always holding a lamb. I guess good shepherd. So he's always holding a lamb. Long hair, light skin. Let's go to the next one. Again, classic image of Jesus. And let's go to one more. All of these depictions of Jesus with, what I want to point out is the light skin, the blue eyes, which is almost certainly not the way Jesus looked. This is the depiction of essentially European and American people, basically trying to make Jesus look like us. Jesus almost certainly did not look like that. So what we do know about Jesus is that he lived in the Middle East. He worked outside. He was a laborer. He probably had darker skin than I do. He had very dark, if not black hair. He would have had very dark eyes, and he was probably very calloused. Jesus in pictures like this looks very effeminate. Jesus was not effeminate. He was a carpenter. He was a stonemason. He worked out in the elements, lifting heavy things and hammering and sawing and splitting stones and putting them in place. Jesus was a man. He was a man's man. He didn't look like this, I'm almost certain. So what did Jesus look like? Forensic anthropologists have attempted to give us a picture of what a man like Jesus, from Jesus' race and ethnicity, his time in history, what might someone from Jesus' day, from Jesus' race and ethnicity have looked like? This is the best picture that they have for us. This is what Jesus probably looked something like. This is certainly more accurate, far more accurate, I'm sure, than the previous picture. This is obviously not exactly what Jesus looked like, but he looked maybe something like that. So what do we know? Again, this is, that picture is also not definitive. That may not have been exactly what Jesus looked like. But so what do we know? There are two minor things that we know about Jesus' physical appearance. The first thing we know is that he had a beard. Now, we quote know that because we're assuming he had a beard because that would have been typical of Jewish men in Jesus' day, in Jesus' culture, particularly of people who were men who were rabbis. That was almost universal. Jewish men in Jesus' day, particularly rabbis, would have had a beard. We also know more specifically, though, in Isaiah chapter 50, verse 6, there's a prophecy about the Messiah. And it says, among the other indignities that the Messiah would suffer as he was going to his death, it says that he would have his beard, pulled, ripped from his face. Incredibly painful, I'm sure. So we know Jesus had a beard because even though, again, the four Gospels don't tell us this detail, the prophecies of Isaiah tell us that one of the indignities Jesus suffered is that he had his beard ripped from his face. So one thing we know about Jesus is that he had a beard. The only other thing we know about Jesus' physical appearance comes from Isaiah 53, verse 2. It says, he had no beauty or majesty to attract us to him. Nothing in his appearance that we should desire him. Let me read it again. He had no beauty or majesty to attract us to him. Nothing in his appearance that we should desire him. Now, does that mean he was ugly? I don't know. He was somewhere between ugly and just extremely average to the point that you would not have turned your head and looked at him because he was so handsome. He was somewhere in that range. He was no Mike Seaver, right? Now, it's kind of weird to think about Jesus as being ugly or at minimum just being not attractive. But I want you to think about this. Is there anything about the situation into which Jesus was born that was attractive? He's born in a barn to peasant parents who can't even afford to give the normal sacrifice in the temple. They give two doves instead of the normal lamb because they can't afford a lamb. He grows up in this place called Nazareth, which was the most backwater, nothing of a place. It's kind of like Rimmel, kind of like Bono, where I live. In other words, Nazareth, you may not know this, as best we can tell, Nazareth wasn't even depicted on any map in Jesus' day. Any Roman or Palestinian or Jewish map, it didn't even appear. It was such a nothing place, it didn't even appear on a map. That's where Jesus grew up. And of course, as he goes into his ministry, he gets famous, but at the end, what happens? Goes south pretty bad. In other words, everything about Jesus' situation when he is incarnated, when he goes from godhood to manhood, when he becomes human, when he is born as a baby, is there anything about that situation that is, quote, not ugly? I would suggest that everything about Jesus' situation was what we would call ugly. So would it be a surprise then to believe that Jesus' physical appearance might be something that we would call ugly? Well, again, I don't know for sure. What we know is that if he wasn't ugly, what we know is that he was not physically attractive, whatever that means. Now, when we think of Jesus in his pre-incarnate form, it's so different, isn't it? Like, for instance, in Isaiah chapter 6, Isaiah the prophet is commissioned as a prophet, and he meets God, the Lord, high and exalted on his throne. It says the train of his robes filled the temple. And that there is radiant beauty shooting out in every direction. There's angels on all sides worshiping the Lord. It is radiant, majestic, glorious. That is the pre-incarnate Jesus. He is in the form that he had before becoming human. He is the most beautiful and glorious and radiant being that one could ever imagine. That's the depiction of who Jesus was before he became one of us. And then he's born in a barn to poor peasant parents, seemingly out of wedlock, which would have stigmatized him and his mother for life in that culture. But even more indignity, if all those other indignities weren't enough, the final indignity that he has heaped upon him when he becomes human is that he was thoroughly unattractive. Philippians 2, verses 5 through 8 says this: "In your relationships with one another, have the same mindset as Christ Jesus, who being in very nature God, did not consider equality with God something to be used to his own advantage. Rather, he made himself nothing, by taking the very nature of a servant, being made in human likeness, and being found in appearance as a man, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to death, even death on a cross." Jesus, when he became human, when he was born in human form, when he becomes a human baby, he gives up all that power and all that glory and all that radiance and all that beauty and all that majesty to become human. But not only did he give up the immense glory and beauty as God, when he became human, he wasn't even attractive by human standards. Isn't that interesting? In terms of appearance, Jesus went all the way down, just like he did in every other way. Within a culture so utterly obsessed with looks and beauty and attractiveness, Jesus, as Jesus always does, shows us the way. Because of his inexhaustible, immeasurable love for you, he not only gave up his staggering, glorious beauty as God, but he wasn't even an attractive human. And that's just another example that we're reminded of this time of year, of the incredible love of Jesus. Let's pray. Holy Lord, would you help us to be like Jesus? Would you help us to never place our worth or value in our physical appearance? Will you help us to realize that our worth and our value is so much more than our looks? Help us to follow the example of Jesus, to be willing to give up and set aside our rights and our prerogatives, just like he did, and to instead live for and to prioritize the things that truly matter. And we lift up this in his name. Amen.